Hi, everyone, and welcome back. I'm very pleased today to be joined again by Michael Hudson, professor of political economy, to discuss U.S. economic coercion against allies. So welcome back to the program.
It's good to be back, Glenn.
So there is this interesting development. My thesis is that in the unipolar era, states that followed the US would be rewarded, and those who did not could be punished because there were no alternatives. Now, in the multipolar order, the game appears to change, at least the rules of the game. That is, opponents of the United States and also neutral states who don't want to ally too closely, they have the option of diversifying their economic partnerships, and thus any effort to pressure them, it simply results in incentive to diversify more away from the United States. In other words, the US doesn't really have that much advantage as we see vis-a-vis China or Russia. In contrast, I think we see allies of the US who are worried about the rise of other great powers and have, hitched their wagons completely to the US. They seem more prepared to sacrifice even their own economic interests to preserve US leading position, but also their own ties and connections with the US. And this puts the US in a very favorable position. It can take advantage of this subordination of allies. The US can then also sever them from other centers of powers to extract, be it political security or economic concessions. So I guess my point is, it seems that the US it's easier to have an economic war against allies. And it's through this that I found an article of yours I recently read very interesting, because you compare some of the things the United States is doing today to the policies of Britain and France in the 19th century. I was wondering if you could flesh out your argument.
Well, I want to take issue from the start with your use of the word opponents of the United States. I guess you're referring to the BRICS, China, Russia, Iran, and the other countries that are meeting. In all of their announcements that their presidents and representatives made at these meetings, there wasn't a word about the United States as an opponent, or in fact, there was no mention of the United States at all. They look at themselves as being under attack by the United States, much as the United States is indeed treating Europe. They're not trying to retaliate from the United States. They're trying to defend themselves against Trump's demands that he's making of these countries, and the demands he's making are the same for the BRICS as they are for Britain, for the European countries, for Japan. And in fact, right now, there's in Korea, you have discussions right now, and even Korea, one of the U.S. allies that the United States would like to drain, is standing up. And the U.S. and the United States has threatened Korea, like Japan, saying, if you don't lend $350 billion to me, the United States, to be handled by me, President Trump, to decide how to spend it, and you'll get 10% of the earnings, if there are any, and we get 90%. If you don't do that, we're going to raise tariffs on you and create a crisis. And you'll have unemployment, and that'll lead voters to vote against you, and we'll create a crisis. And just the other day, the U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick told the Koreans bluntly, quoted in yesterday's Financial Times, quote, "The Japanese signed a contract, $350 billion. The Koreans either accept the deal or pay the tariffs. Black and white. Pay the tariffs or accept the deal." Well, that's just what he's told Europe. There's no, the question is, what makes Europe different from the BRICS countries that are trying to make an alternative, saying, well, all right, Trump is threatening to deprive our export industries of access to the United States market. If we agree to his demands, it's going to cost us more money to just pay tribute to the United States in what's really a protection racket. Either pay us money and accept our import duties and our demands for you to dismantle your industry and invest here, or we'll raise tariffs and cause a crisis for you. Same demand is made all over. And you asked, why is the United States making, this demand on Europe specifically? The demand's exactly the same. Europe is given up because it's made its leaders, I won't say Europe, certainly not its voters, but the European leaders, basically NATO leaders in the EU foreign ministers, have made a decision that they'd rather live in the short run, like politicians do, and not have destruction of their industry, than live in the long run. They have a choice. Either the choice was made before 2022 when they essentially agreed to blow up the North Sea pipeline, or let the United States blow it up, and depend completely on the U.S. for oil. They said, well, at least we can depend on the United States. That's what Ursula von der Leyen said. We can depend on the United States. And yet Trump has made it clear, most recently yesterday in Britain, when he said, well, if you do any move that is at the cost of American industry, for instance, in information technology, imposing minimum taxes against U.S. information technology companies, like Europe's doing, will simply raise tariffs on you. Trump can raise, and of course, Europe has already tried to stand up for this, but von der Leyen, who was doing the negotiation, never even tried to fight back. She said, well, at least we can depend on Trump never to change his mind or change the deal. At least we have certainty. Well, that's crazy. There was no certainty at all. And so Europe doesn't have it. And the question is, Europe had two choices. The choice before 2022 was to have a balanced and basically independent economy as long as its industrial economy was symbiotic with Russia as a raw material supplier of oil, gas, fertilizer, and other basic materials. The advantage of this for Europe was, well, Europe, Russia, and China, and the BRICS are the growing part of the world economy. The U.S. is a shrinking part of the U economy. And Trump's policies are actually destroying U.S. agriculture, U.S. industry. It's making the United States uninvestable. Companies are closing down now, and it's becoming the profits are going down because of the imports, especially on steel and aluminum. And so you think, why on earth would Europe agree to tie its long-term fortunes to the United States and lose its domestic self-sufficiency and self-reliance that it had as long as it had free access, open access to Russian raw materials and energy, to energy that costs 5 or 6 times as high. And once it's become lost this independence, it loses the option that the BRICS countries have taken and saying, well, we're willing to lose the U.S. market in order, because that's a shrinking market over time. There will be a cost in the short term, but that cost is less than having to pay $350 billion to is the shakedown fee to the United States just to keep our short-term market open. The U.S. market is not worth $350 billion either to Japan or Korea. Each of these countries could have paid $350, 50,000, 50. They could have paid $350 billion to subsidize their own exporters so that they could afford to cope with the tariffs. They didn't do it. They just Japan just surrendered. Korea right now is refusing to surrender, and yesterday its foreign minister team was in China trying to say, isn't there some way that we could, suppose that we lose the American market? We're faced with a demand that we can't possibly make. We may walk away from them. What deal could we make with you and your Asian neighbors in order for us to have our own self-reliant, individual, geographic system of self-sufficiency so that we're immune from the kind of threats that the United States is making? Well, Europe has not made itself immune from these threats. And part of this is military. Again and again, the leaders of Germany and France, as well as Britain, have said, well, we need America's support in case Russia mounts a land invasion and is willing to sacrifice 20 million of its soldiers trying to march across Europe to the British Isles. Well, this is crazy. This is a parallel universe threat. It has no basis in reality because no country, and no industrial country in today's world can afford a military infantry invasion of any other country, because not only would masses of soldiers die, but such a country would, if it tried to impose a draft, would be thrown out of office right away. So you have Europe's policymakers essentially acting on behalf of NATO, which is controlled by the United States, instead of on behalf of their own voters. And you have the public relations polls showing that the voters don't want war in Ukraine. The voters don't want their social spending in Europe to be cut back in order to spend the limited budgets on military instead of on domestic things. So it's not a question of the United States focusing its demands on the Allies. Its demands are across the board. They're the same for every country. Either we'll close off our markets or you have to pay us money not to disrupt your economy and cause at least temporary short-term chaos. Other countries are protecting themselves from chaos. Britain is not protecting itself from chaos. That's the basic problem that I see.
Well, I think a lot of it is tied, as you suggested, to the war in Ukraine, though, because when the Cold War came to an end, in other words, the Europeans became less dependent on the US as a security provider, given that the Cold War was finished. We saw that the main objectives in Europe were that of autonomy. They were speaking of using collective bargaining power to have an economic position that would make them an equal to the United States. The Europeans, even immediately in 1992, as the Soviet Union had just collapsed, a month or two thereafter, began to discuss, how about we develop our own military? Obviously, there was no threat, but this was also an effort to have more autonomy. They wanted their own foreign policy and pursue this as well. That is a collective EU foreign policy. So this is what you can do when the dominant state can't convert its security dependence into economic loyalty. But what you've seen since the Ukraine war, though, when the external threats appear and the security dependence becomes evident, it's quite predictable that the dominant power, the security provider, will then seek to extract economic and political concession of its vassals or protectorates. And I don't know. From my perspective, this has been a key argument of mine since NATO started the conflict in Ukraine with the coup in 2014. Is Europe is putting itself in a very vulnerable position because the U.S., we keep saying friends and allies, which is nice and well. I mean, we are close and we should be close, but states behave like states, and when you make yourself excessively dependent on another state, it will seek to have some material benefits from this. But you mentioned, though, that the conquest of Europe as it is, have you
Before you
had
go on, you use the word security provider. That's quite a euphemism, and I want to do an Erläuterungsanalysis of that. The United States is imposing unparalleled insecurity on Europe because you have both Germany and France and Britain offering to provide long-range missiles to Ukraine in order to use against Russia and to launch against Russia, especially Moscow and St. Petersburg, that are in range of these missiles that are to be sent. And the the European leaders say, like Starmer yesterday, they want to bomb Russia. Well, both President Putin and Foreign Minister Lavrov have said if a foreign missile is launched by Ukraine against Russia, we realize that our fight is not against Ukraine. Our fight is against NATO. This is a war between NATO and Russia. And if a bomb comes from a German manufacturer, then we're going to bomb the source. We're going to bomb Germany, at least the factory in Germany, maybe the power plants that supply energy to this factory. Same thing in France, same thing in Britain. Now, the question is, once you have intercontinental missiles flying from Russia, Russia doesn't need atomic weapons. It has a much broader range of weapons than NATO countries have. And these weapons are not atomic, and the NATO countries themselves are pretty much out of weaponry. They've given them all to Ukraine and to Israel. And they're any thought of actually engaging in war is such a fantasy that it would be like Bambi meets Goliath. Russia would respond very quickly, and the result is because of the belligerence of von der Leyen and the Estonian assistant, Kallas, this is putting Europe in insecurity and in great military danger. There's no danger at all from an armed military infantry invasion. And without a military invasion, you can't control and gain control over another country. That's what Russia is doing now in Ukraine, and you see the enormous problems that it has, even in Ukraine. What countries can do, and the democratic form of war, is by missiles, simply to destroy the other countries. Wars, the modern post-World War II, a modern type of war, is mutual destruction by missile, by air, whether it's from submarines or land-based based missiles. That's the kind of war and hence insecurity that Europe is going to have. So the not only is Europe's plan to sort of have a bastardized Keynesianism and a military Keynesianism of, well, let's spend our money on military industry, and that will maybe create the employment that we've lost in our civilian industry as a result of having to depend on American gas and oil instead of Russian gas and oil. But it's going to it threatens the actual existence of the European countries. Russia's made it clear that it has no interest in taking over Europe. It wants to be simply left alone. And Europe is obeying the United States, not simply in these tariff demands and the givebacks that Trump is making, but in a much deeper connection of following the U.S. Cold War, now increasingly hot war, leadership. That's what's essentially bankrupting Europe. It's joined a new military axis that is uh, in no way militarily capable of taking on Russia. And I think your military guests on your show have made this very clear over the last few months. And the question is, why is it that Europe's leaders, political leaders who are in charge of committing Europe, able to make this choice on behalf of their whole nations in the face of the public's voters saying, we want Europe to stand up for itself, to be more nationalistic. We want, and if the social democratic and Christian parties are the pro-war military parties that are basically accepting our dependence on the United States and are giving up our hopes for growth by trade with Asia, Central Asia, South Asia, North Asia, East Asia, then we're going to support a nationalistic opposition when there are elections. Well, unfortunately, there are no full national elections coming up, either for Germany or for France shortly, or for England. And so you see the problem that Europe is stuck with a U.S. client leadership, not its own leadership. And this U.S. centered leadership is backed by a U.S. centered neoliberal mass media, the press, the television, the whole content, the whole narrative of economic development is twisted in Europe. They actually think that Ukraine has a chance to win, according to Starmer and Merz and Macron. And there's no chance of it winning. They think that the war is somehow leading to a Russian collapse, but Russia's self-sufficient. There's no way that Russia can collapse from foreign sanctions any more than China or its allies can collapse from American sanctions because they're self-sufficient. Europe had this self-sufficiency before. It's given it all up in exchange for dependency, not realizing that the costs of dependency, when you have an American leader such as Donald Trump acting on behalf of American large businesses and monopolies, and most of all, the military-industrial complex, is going to make demands that basically bankrupt Europe and reverse its GDP growth, reverse its living standards, and impose austerity on it.
Well, the problem though is that when political leadership doesn't pursue its basic economic national interests, such and subordinate itself in the way the Europeans are, you would expect a vacuum to emerge that is being filled by actors who would actually pursue national interest. And this is the problem, because if you have leaders subordinating themselves, they might actually end up killing democracy as well, because they will want to seek to prevent that vacuum to be filled by people who actually respond to public interest. So in Germany, you have AfD, which is now the most popular political party, and they want to restore the peace with Russia, but they label them an extremist organization. They're discussing banning it. In France, I guess the closest you would have would be Le Pen, but yeah, she was arrested. You have, as everyone knows, the presidential election in Romania went the wrong way, so they just canceled the results. And I was reading Politico today, actually, and they're having now election in the Czech Republic, and they might get a new prime minister. But Andrej Babis, the one who is leading the polls, they might block him from being allowed to be prime minister because, and political sites, one of the two major reasons is he has an ambiguous relationship with NATO. He's not clearly supportive. I mean, this is. But what we did this to Ukraine too, when Zelensky won on that peace platform back in 2019, which 73% of Ukrainians voted for. Many of the NATO countries, they financed NGOs, which drew a red line and essentially threatened Zelensky to abandon this idea because he wasn't allowed to talk peace with Russia without having NATO in the room. So you have this. I mean, when you have a political elite which doesn't pursue national interest and they prevent anyone from filling the vacuum left behind by their incompetence, you're going to kill democracy at some point, though.
Yeah, that's what has happened, not only regarding Russia, but regarding Israel. If you make the claim that you're against Nazism, if you make the claim that you're against treating any national, ethnic religion as being physically subhuman and a different species, if you say that everybody's a human being, we're the same species, you can't have genocide, that's a crime in Germany because you're saying that the Palestinians are human beings. That's a crime if in Germany because the Palestinians, well, I don't have to explain that. If you say in Ukraine that the Slavs, the Russian speakers, are not subhumans, that's a crime. You're having a resurgence of Nazism sweeping across Europe, centered in Germany as it was before, and the result is that all of Europe has joined with Germany to say, let's refight World War II in the belief that they can win this time. And I think part of this illusion is a whole generation of Europeans has grown up not only on American movies, but on a false idea of what World War II, who fought World War II. The two main fighters of World War II was Russia, that lost 22 million people, and China, that lost 18 million people. This is far more than the Westerners, the Europeans and American lost. It was the fight. It was the Russians who broke the Wehrmacht strength, and it was China that broke Japan's strength that began in 1931 with Japan's takeover of Manchuria. The Europeans imagine that somehow they, or really the Americans, won World War II. And all the Americans did was pretty much put them on rations. It charged for the effort, and they came in at the end. They very quickly ended World War II in Japan by using the atom bomb in Japan before the Russians had a chance to drive the Japanese out and lead to a communist domination of Japan. And the same thing happened in Western Europe. The Americans delayed and delayed and delayed. The Americans wanted the European war to continue as long as it could, as long as it was killing Russians and Japanese. And the Europeans went along with this. This is how the Russian histories see the war. It's how the Chinese histories see the war. That's not how the Europeans see the war. They think, well, we beat Russia before with American help. We can do it again with American help. In this way, just as we carved up the Near East after World War II and Africa between France, Germany, France, England, and the United States, we can do it all again. There's this myth that has somehow created a false narrative guiding how Europeans think about what they can achieve in the future. And it's a false narrative that is almost suicidally self-deceptive.
Well, on that fact, and it has to be stressed as a fact that the Russians and the Chinese, or more correctly, the Soviets and the Chinese were the ones who, did the heavy burden, carried the heavy burden in terms of defeating fascism. But recently, you have Kaja Kallas, the EU foreign policy chief, mocking it, saying, "Oh, this Chinese and Russians, they're claiming that they defeat fascism. Oh, they don't read books over there. Like we know that." I'm not sure. I think she watches a lot of movies, perhaps as well, thinking maybe World War II was won by Tom Hanks. I'm not sure where her information comes from, but she even mocked the idea in front of camera that
It
this
implies
was the case. It was
it
quite.
implies there's a different set of books. There's one set of books for the majority of the world population. The German history books and the French history books and the English history books have all been rewritten from in a more and more extreme distortion of what actually happened.
But there's been polls over the decades since World War II from France and other countries where they ask, who was most, who cared the greatest, who more or less did the most to liberate France and save Europe from fascism. And immediately after World War II in France, I think it's like 85-90% who said, well, obviously it was the Soviets. And then you see through the decades of powerful propaganda, and it ends up now, the most recent one, with a tiny minority, I think it's like 18 or 21%, who believed it's the Soviet Union who did the most to defeat Nazi Germany. So propaganda works. You just tell the same stories over and over again, and after a while, people buy it. And now we're told that, World War II was actually caused by both the fascist and the Soviet Union, and it was the freedom-loving states of the West that beat fascism. I mean, it's quite an extraordinary tale.
Well, that's a false way of framing it. Was Europe saved from fascism? If you look at Europe today, it was not saved from fascism. If Europe was saved for fascism was rescued by the United States almost immediately. The United States immediately hired the main Nazi bureaucracy and put them to work fighting the left wing. You had Operation Gladio in Italy. You have the terrorism organized by the CIA and American foreign policy, and the support of immediately the United States hired the Ukrainian fascists, the Nazis, to organize Ukrainian nationalist movement. The United States saved fascism from being defeated by Europe. And fascism was America's response to socialism and a working class movement. It was that Aldo Moro was killed in Italy. European politicians were killed, just as Lumumba was killed in Africa, and Pinochet killed Allende in Chile. You had political assassination. You have a whole extension through America's National Endowment for Democracy of creating non-governmental organizations that have acted as funding processes to bring what you can only call fascist leaders to Europe. Merz is a fascist. There's no other word for it, and you could say the same as Callas. You could say the same as von der Leyen with her Nazi background as family. Was Europe saved for fascism? And if so, why is there a resurgence of fascism today, of supporting ethnic genocide in countries that the United States declares as necessary for its control of various regions of the world? This is really the fight. You're quite right in pointing to the crackdown of civil rights, of free speech. That's fascism. You're seeing the same kind of takeover in the United States in the last week or so, just by Donald Trump, or imposing a new epoch of McCarthyism, like the 1950s, of attacking what he calls the left, as if somehow the left was in charge of assassinating Charlie Kirk. You're having something political occur from Europe to the United States that I don't think anyone at the end of World War II, in the whole optimism of believing that because they defeated Germany and Italy, they'd defeated fascism. The fact is that this brought back the class war between American dominance and oligarchy and socialism, to put it, labels on it. And that fight is gone on. There's still been a fight against socialism and against democracy. The movement of Europe has not been towards democracy. It's been away from it. It's been towards dependent on an increasingly undemocratic imperialism and even dictatorship by the U.S. neocons and neoliberals that are trying to push for a refight of World War II against Russia and China this time. And just as they were able to end up defeating fascism, whether it's German or Japanese in World War II, the same thing would happen today, but the fight is going to be much more violent and fought by missiles, not by infantries.
Yeah, the idea that the U.S. wouldn't have worked or supported fascists, that this was only an anti-fascist alliance, is kind of interesting, because I just looked it up here. A quote by Harry Truman before he took the presidency, though. He said, "Here is, if we see that Germany is winning, we ought to help Russia, and if Russia is winning, we ought to help Germany, and that way let them kill as many as possible." And towards the end of the Second World War, we also had the British, who then developed this plan called Operation Unthinkable, developed in May of 1945, when the war was coming to an end, which entailed not just the US and Britain, but also using what remained of the fascist army to do a surprise attack on the Soviet Union immediately after the common victory. So this, but give this 80 years of Hollywood, and we have a very different story. I did want to shift there a bit back towards the economic conquest, if you will, of allies, because we mentioned the Europeans, but the US also has some, I guess, loyal allies in East Asia. I'm thinking then Korea, Japan, and Taiwan. Each of them have also strong, well, let's call it security dependence on the United States. How is the US trying to, I guess, put the squeeze on this? Two countries and one island, let's say.
Well, again, the word security dependence is a euphemism. It's Orwellian doublethink. Japan has talked about rearming, and it's even talking about becoming perhaps an atomic power again. If Japan rearms, this is going to immediately lead China to defend itself, and Japan's already met a devastating loss in World War II. There's no way in which Japan can be a real military threat to anyone. Certainly the North Koreans, like the South Koreans, have no love for Japan at all because of its brutal occupation of Korea for so many generations. There's almost a hatred of Japan there. Japan, by the Liberal Democratic Party, being installed by the United States, by America's compact with the Japanese Yakuzis, the criminals. MacArthur in Japan and the U.S. State Department made deals with the criminals to go and beat up attack the socialist demonstrations. There was a chance of socialism in Japan after World War II, a reaction by the Japanese. And the American alternative was to make Japan basically a largely criminalized mafia-like oligarchy controlled by the LDP. Well, the recent elections now are for the first time threatening to dethrone the pro-U.S. Liberal Democratic Party and put in a more nationalist party. And all nationalism means, it doesn't mean the Japanese nationalism of the 1930s, military style. It means independence from the United States. And the aim is not to put Japan at risk of any kind of war again. Well, again, Japan is host of the military, U.S. military bases. And a few weeks ago, you had China's great military demonstration very explicitly showing missiles that they pointed out this missile can hit Guam. America's military outpost in the west, the Pacific, and it can hit the other Japanese military outposts. So it's not Japan's risking its security. The same thing with Taiwan. There's a very heavy Taiwanese investment in mainland China. There already is a kind of economic symbiosis between the two countries, but the United States is trying to drive a wedge in that. And the Chinese have said, if for any reason you're able to co-opt the Taiwanese leaders in the way that you've co-opted, say, the European leaders, we're going to, hit down very hard, and it'll be no contest. Your naval fleet are just sitting ducks. Your naval power that helped win World War II is no longer an active military tool because we can wipe them out in one day. In the entire Navy. Navies are obsolete as the tool for control that they were for so many centuries when Britain had the greatest navy in the world. And the whole idea of navies for Britain was to deal with seacoast, with economic development around the seacoast. And that was because Britain was promoting foreign trade and commercial interdependence among countries. Well, China has tried to counteract this whole Mackinder-like strategy of controlling the periphery of continents by trade. China is developing internal connections through the Belt and Road Initiative with railways, pipelines, highways, all sorts of interconnections. So the whole vehicles of foreign trade are now becoming more inland and domestic. What that does is create domestic regional spheres of influence and self-dependency to become independent. The effect of the United States demands that it's made on everyone from Europe to Asia to Latin America are so overreaching that they've created a reaction against the whole last 2 centuries of liberalism that saw foreign trade and interconnections as I won't say a rules-based order, but an economic order of stability. You have these interconnections now being weaponized. Trump has weaponized foreign trade, both foreign access to the U.S. market for European and other exporters, and the ability to import basic needs that the United States controls, headed by oil and also agriculture, and now by high technology, electronics, trying to weaponize all this trade to create a form of dependency that the United States can use as a demand. We will destabilize your economy if you don't give in to our demands. And the real reason, going back to your first question again, why is the United States treating Europe that way and trying to treat the BRICS countries the same way? That's because the United States is no longer industrialized. It's deindustrialized. It's made all this growth of wealth since 2008, the junk mortgage crisis, has been in the stock, bond, and real estate markets. It's financial wealth. It's not the wealth of real production. It's not the wealth of living standards. Living standards have not risen for more than half of Americans since 2008. It's all been so concentrated in the wealthiest 10% that the wealthiest 10% of Americans are responsible for 50% of all the growth in consumption goods. But of course, the consumption goods of the wealthiest 10% are not the same kind of consumer goods that the bottom 90% buy: food and basic needs. They're luxuries. They're Andy Warhol etchings, and they're trophies and Italian fashions. All of this was way back in the 17th century, 18th century. All of this was being debated, and realizing that the financial sector does not really behave like an industrial sector, and that we're seeing a whole transformation in the dynamics of what capitalism is all about, what economies are all about. Well, you and I have talked about that before, and all of that has a political dimension, and the political dimension means that if America is to avoid an even deeper squeeze on its living standards today, it has to get support from other countries to get from them the wealth and the imports and the money and the subsidies to keep its economy going that its domestic economy no longer can provide. So the United States has lost its own ability to be self-sufficient, and its response to Europe is to destroy Europe's ability to be economically and commercially and financially self-sufficient. While the BRICS, Asia, now in conjunction with the Global South, Africa, parts of Latin America, are putting their own self-sufficiency as a chief economic aim, so that they will not become subject to the U.S. browbeating and extortion and the threats of disrupting their economies. If you insulate your economy from the United States, there's nothing it can do to you to impose sanctions or to raise tariffs or to weaponize its import and export trade and financial trade.
Well, this is why, the whole U.S.-led alliance systems has changed so fundamental. Because after World War II, the United States actually had some extremely generous trade agreement with frontline states, be it the Germany or all the Europeans for that sake, or South Korea, Taiwan, Japan. So it's just in this era, all countries are now faced with a dilemma as the U.S. is seeking to extract concessions. That is, either they fall into the demands, but by doing so, of course, they have to sever themselves off from other countries, and then isolate themselves more, make themselves more dependent on the U.S., or they seek a full autonomy by actually diversifying. But then they have to lean more into BRICS, SEO, and similar institutions. But there's not that many middle grounds anymore, and I think that's why the U.S. overreach with India was so spectacular, because the assumption was they could make Europeans out of them in terms of cutting themselves off from all other centers of power, subordinating themselves to the U.S., and signing whatever they put in front of them. And it turned out that they had to go the other way. But the fact that the Modi had to go to China kind of pointed out, from my perspective, this dilemma that there's no middle ground anymore. Either you have to subordinate yourself, or you have to protect yourself by diversifying. But then you have to lean into the multipolar institutions. So it's a fascinating time. It's an interesting social experiment as well for that sake. I'm not sure if you have any final thoughts before we wrap
Well,
this up.
only the countries that America defeated in World War II have turned into surrender monkeys. Japan has become an abject victim of the Stockholm syndrome, and of course Germany. They're the two countries that have given in. And the other great opponent of the United States in World War II was, of course, Britain. And the British loan of 1944 and the trade agreements that you just mentioned that were favorable to other countries were aimed specifically at breaking up the British Empire. By opening international markets, they ended British imperial preference. That meant that all of the foreign exchange, the earnings made by India and Argentina and other global South raw materials exporters, were no longer required to be spent within the British Empire, but could be spent anywhere. Well, Britain's economy was destroyed, and so that meant free to be spent in the United States. And the trade agreements that were made, it's true, with Germany, European countries. Of course, the United States favored the trade there because the European companies were being bought out by American multinational firms. And what was supported above all in Europe were the international firms. And that's exactly what the fight is this week between in the last month by Trump against England and the EU. Today's Financial Times has a whole wonderful article. Britain must stand up to U.S. pressure on tech rules. And this is about the digital services tax of Europe. Europe at least is trying to impose a digital services tax on American technology firms because they've been able to use Hollywood accounting to avoid having to pay income taxes there. And Trump has said, well, told England, Britain, if you try to stand up to us and impose your digital services tax on American companies, or try to limit what my contributors in Silicon Valley want to do, we're going to raise tariffs on you again, no matter what the agreement we made last spring. Well, if he can say it to Britain, he can certainly say it to the EU. He's made it very clear to the EU that if anything the EU does that is at the cost of American firms, as long as these multinationals contribute to Trump's Republican campaign and his personal campaign and invest personally in his cryptocurrency scams and the other scams, he'll just squeeze tighten the screws on these countries. So that's basically what's been happening there. I guess that's my final thought. Europe has succumbed to giving all of the diplomatic, trade, commercial, and financial initiative to U.S. planners who are not making open-ended trade and financial agreements that benefit all countries. But as Trump said, the United States has to be the winner in any deal that it's making with foreign countries. And that's why the United States is not making international deals anymore. Trump says, we're going to make deals on a country-by-country basis. We're going to divide and conquer. It worked for Britain for a couple of centuries. It'll work for us. And as long as we can play different countries against each other, and it's us, the U.S. economy versus much smaller individual economies, they'd rather hang separate. As long as we can make them willing to hang separately instead of hanging together, then we've won the diplomatic fight for control.
Yeah, well, I think the fault of the flaw of the Europeans is that they think they should just wait out Trump, as if this is only about Trump. I mean, I think he's quite extreme in radical in its approach in terms of recognizing a problem and seeking to solve it. But I don't think the alternatives are, well, the Bidens of the world would necessarily go in a very different direction. Of course, it might be a bit milder, but the overarching problem isn't. I mean, we tend to focus on personalities, but what is the end stage? I mean, how else is capitalist system being so exhausted? What else is it gonna do? I mean, the US, if it can't compete anymore, it's losing the technological lead. It's drowning in debt. The massive economic inequality is fueling social and political problem. I mean, one sees that this has reached the end of the line. There's no more ways to deal with the coming financial crisis. You can't put the interest rate down or up, as either it's gonna make collapse the dollar, or it's gonna make the debt repayment unmanageable. So it is a brick wall, it seems. So I think Trump deals with this in a, let's say, a very authoritarian way. But the idea that we can just go back to the way things were, I think this is quite delusional. It's wishful thinking.
Well, that's the whole problem, Glenn. You put your finger on it. The way things were. The way things were today is not how they were in 1945. There was still an active left wing in Europe. There was a chance of Europe going socialist in a mixed economy. And certainly the British Labour Party in the 1940s was progressive like that. There was progressive movements throughout Europe. All of that was counteracted by the United States to prevent that. And you had the old European moneyed aristocracy fighting against this, pushing essentially for neoliberalism, for a dismantling of government strong enough to regulate the financial oligarchies that were emerging and making fortunes on a mutual interdependency with American multinational firms and multinational investments. And the whole world economy was restructured in U.S.-centric lines that have led to this problem. So there's in order for Europe to prosper again, it needs to rethink the whole direction of history. And of course, that's what you and I have been talking about for the last few months. And they have to reinvent the economic wheel to analyze how do we create a mixed economy that's going to promote growth, rising living standards, and industry instead of creating financial fortunes, American style, that's leading to our deindustrialization, just as it's led to America's deindustrialization. How do we end up avoiding looking like the United States? And what is China doing right in what its takeoff that really is following the very policies that made Britain and Germany and the United States industrial powers in the late 19th century.
Oh, well, that's the interesting part when the way that China's capitalism is defined as managed capitalism, all these strange words, which, but if you look at it, it's very, very similar to the industrial capitalism of the US itself in the 19th century. But yes, Michael Hudson, as always, thank you so much for sharing your insights. And we'll leave a link to your blog in the description as well. And I can't recommend your books enough to the listeners. So thank you again.
Thank you very much, Glenn, for the compliments.